He gave them everything, yet, when he needed just a little love, they all were nowhere to be found. This is the story of an aging billionaire who disguised himself to see who truly cared, and what he uncovered in the shadows of his own mansion left the entire village in shock. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to Tales of Kuzi for more amazing stories. The morning sun rose lazily over Elder Hill, brushing gold across the rolling cocoa fields that stretched for miles beyond the village. Birds trilled their morning songs from the crooked limbs of ancient baobab trees, and the red earth still held the coolness of dawn. It was a quiet, proud village nestled in the Ashanti Highlands, known across Ghana not just for its fertile land but for one name, Edmund Langley. To the people of Elder Hill, he was more than a man. He was a legend. Edmund Langley, now 72, had not always been rich. His father was a modest cocoa farmer who died young, leaving behind a patch of land no larger than a school football field. It was there, as a teenager with calloused hands and blistered feet, that Edmund worked the soil with the fury of someone who knew poverty too well. By the time he was 30, he had acquired 2 more plots. At 40, he owned 7 farms, had built a small processing plant, and had brokers in Accra calling him sir. Now, decades later, he was the largest cocoa magnate in the central belt of Ghana, perhaps even the region. His whitewashed mansion, perched on the highest hill in Elder Hill, overlooked not only his vast farmland but also the very homes of the workers whose fathers he had once farmed beside. And yet, despite his wealth, Edmund kept an old wooden stool by his bed, the same one his mother used to sit on to fan him when he was ill. It was a symbol of where he came from and of what he feared losing. But success, as the village elders often whispered, can be a lonely crown to wear. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 6 years earlier. She was his balance, his moral compass, the only one who dared to scold him when he grew too proud. With her gone, the mansion turned into a silent museum. No more morning gospel music echoing through the halls. No more laughter in the garden. Just polished marble floors and the distant hum of the generator. His 4 children, Benjamin, Leo, Victor, and Naomi, were all grown. Edmund had spent hundreds of thousands on their education, sending them to boarding schools in Surrey, business colleges in Oxford, and art programs in Cape Town. Naomi once said she wanted to be a designer. Victor dreamed of running hedge funds. But dreams shifted quickly when their father's money became easier to tap into than building anything of their own. They came back home, yes, but only in transit. At Christmas, they flew in on private jets or business class flights, stayed for 2 or 3 days, took endless photos for social media, and left with thick envelopes their father handed out like tradition. None stayed to ask how the crops were doing. None asked if he was eating well. They all said love you, Dad, but it echoed hollowly, like an email signature typed out of habit. And Edmund began to notice it, the way their eyes always flicked to his wrists, where his Rolex sat, the way they'd lean in when he coughed, not with concern, but with curiosity. Now, in the quiet of his 72nd year, Edmund had begun to feel a strange ache. Not in his bones, but in his spirit. He sat each morning on the wide front terrace, wrapped in his late wife's Kent shawl, sipping bitter cocoa from a clay cup. His staff, some of whom had been with him since his youth, still addressed him with respect. Chief Langley, they said. Bossu. But the titles no longer warmed him. One morning, after waiting all day for a call that never came, he whispered to the wind, "If I died tonight, would they cry for me or for my money?" The baobab trees gave no answer. But deep in his heart, he already knew. That same evening, Edmund stood before the great mirror in his room, the one Margaret had imported from Accra, and stared at his reflection. A strong man, still. Wrinkled, yes, but proud. Sharp eyes. Full head of graying hair. But even strength could not substitute love. It was then the thought struck him. Sudden. Radical. But perfectly clear. "I will pretend to be dying," he said aloud. "And I will see which of them truly cares." 2 days after Edmund Langley made his fateful decision, dark clouds hung low over Elder Hill, as though the sky itself anticipated the storm that was coming, not of thunder, but of truth. He called in Mr. Kwabla, his longtime lawyer and perhaps the only person outside the family who truly understood him. A careful, precise man in his 60s with steel-rimmed glasses and an air of quiet skepticism, Mr. Kwabla sat stiffly in the leather armchair across from Edmund. "You want me to, what, exactly?" he asked slowly. "I want you to tell them I am gravely ill," Edmund said, without flinching. Tell them my body is failing. My mind is going. Make it sound real, not sudden, but serious. Mr. Quabler blinked. Sir, are you sure this is the path? They have never visited unless they smelled inheritance in the air, Edmund interrupted, his voice sharp. I want to know the truth before I go. And if that truth is ugly, I want to see it with my own eyes while I still have time to act. Mr. Quabler leaned back, folded his hands, and nodded. It will be done. By the following evening, the 4 Langley children had received carefully worded messages. Not urgent enough to panic them, but enough to imply time was running out. Benjamin, the eldest at 42, was in London closing a commercial real estate deal when he received the call. He put it on speaker, glanced at the screen, and said to his assistant, "Book me a flight to Ghana, and prepare a proposal to take over the cocoa factory just in case things shift." Leo, 39, who styled himself as a tech investor in Lagos but rarely had more than 3 profitable apps to his name, called his girlfriend and said with a smirk, "Looks like it's almost harvest season. The old man's clock is ticking." Victor, 35, the smooth-talking middle child, was in Cape Town attending an art auction. He barely blinked. "Tell the driver to prep the jet. Time to go home and pay my respects." Naomi, 31, the youngest and only daughter, was in Dubai when she got the news. She ordered room service, called her stylist to pack morning-appropriate but camera-ready outfits, and sighed, "It's so sudden, but maybe it's better this way. He's been living alone too long." None of them cried. None of them even paused. Their minds moved quickly, not to grief, but to property, bank accounts, and the sprawling land deeds tucked away in their father's study. 2 days later, 4 sleek luxury vehicles rolled into the Elderhill compound, engines purring like wildcats. Cameras clicked as assistants carried designer luggage from boots of Benzes and Range Rovers. The villagers, watching from a distance, murmured in awe, but also in quiet disapproval. Inside the mansion, Edmund lay in bed, half upright, feigning weakness. He wore a thin white robe, a scarf draped over his shoulder, and a tired look on his face. His personal nurse, instructed on the ruse, stood silently nearby. The children entered in single file, each one putting on a face that hovered between concern and calculation. "Daddy," Naomi said first, bending down for a kiss on his cheek. "You look tired. Are you eating well?" "I try," Edmund said faintly, his voice deliberately raspy. Benjamin took the armchair by the window, crossed his legs, and checked his watch. "We'll get you the best specialists in Europe if you want. Just say the word." Leo opened a bottle of imported mineral water, not bothering to offer anyone. "What matters now is comfort, yeah? Quality of life." Victor took a long breath and looked around the room. "You know, Dad, it might be time we talk about the estate. Not just the cocoa business, but everything. In case, you want to make things clear." Edmund nodded slowly, eyes flicking from one child to the next. Not one had asked about his pain. Not one had offered to stay the night. They were already circling. Over the next few days, the mask of duty wore thin. They began leaving the house during the day, citing errands and stress relief. In truth, they were exploring, sizing up properties, speaking to business associates in town, even discussing which parts of the business they'd split. Naomi insisted the chef prepare separate meals for her, gluten-free, organic, preferably imported. Leo requested Wi-Fi strong enough for Zoom meetings. Victor complained the AC was too loud. Benjamin moved calls to the veranda and loudly mentioned buying out a fertilizer company, using Dad's leverage of course. None of them once sat by Edmund's bed and simply asked, "How do you feel?" On the third night, alone in his room, Edmund stared at the ceiling fan above. It creaked gently as it spun. So, it was true. They were not here for him. They were here for what would be left when he was gone. He rolled slowly onto his side, pulled the Kent shawl tighter around him, and closed his eyes. A heavy silence filled the room. But just before he drifted off, a faint humming came from the window. A woman's voice. Soft. Gentle. Familiar. Edmund opened his eyes. And that was the first time he noticed Eliza, humming quietly in the moonlit garden below, clipping hibiscus stems by the edge of the window. The mansion grounds had always been immaculate, not because Edmund demanded it, but because Kwaku, his chief gardener, had treated the land like his firstborn. Even after a stroke left Kwaku partially paralyzed on one side, he refused to give up his post. Instead, his niece, Eliza Mensah, a 28-year-old with quiet eyes and deep brown skin, began assisting him. She was not a servant by profession. She had once been a teacher, but after her uncle's stroke, she left the city and returned to Elder Hill to care for him full-time. She never spoke much to anyone in the mansion. She came early, watered the flowers, pruned the bougainvillea, fed the birds, and left before dusk. Her head was always wrapped in a plain blue scarf, and she wore simple skirts and hand-sewn blouses, yet there was something graceful, almost regal, about her manner. Edmund first noticed her on the fourth evening of his children's visit. The sun had dipped behind the hills, casting amber light through the sheer curtains of his bedroom. He lay still in bed, pretending to sleep, listening to the soft murmur of Naomi and Leo arguing in the hallway, about who would get the beachfront property in Elmina if Edmund passed soon. Then came the humming again. Low and tuneful. Familiar, somehow, the way someone hums when they don't think anyone is listening. Edmund opened one eye, then turned his head ever so slightly toward the open window. Below, in the rose garden just beyond the sill, was a young woman kneeling in the dirt, her hands carefully trimming red hibiscus stems. She placed them into a clay pot. She moved slowly but with care, wiping sweat from her brow and pausing every so often to hum. It was the same melody his wife Margaret used to hum while cooking, a lullaby from her mother's village. A simple tune. But hearing it now, from a stranger's lips, stirred something buried deep in Edmund's chest. He kept watching. When Eliza stood and began walking toward the house, hibiscus pot in hand, Edmund closed his eyes again and adjusted his breathing. She entered the room softly, accompanied by the faint scent of earth and flowers. She didn't speak. Instead, she placed the clay pot gently on the table beside his bed. Then she tucked the loose corner of the Kent shawl over his shoulder and stood there for a moment. Watching him. Studying his face. Then, thinking he was asleep, she whispered, "You remind me of my grandfather. He died last year. I wish I'd told him more. That he mattered." Edmund almost opened his eyes, almost, but something in him told him to wait. Let the moment pass unbroken. Eliza adjusted the curtains slightly to block the harsh light from the hallway, and then turned and walked out, her slippers whispering against the polished floor. That night, Edmund sat awake longer than usual. He thought of Margaret, how she'd held his hand when he failed, before the riches came. How she'd cleaned his wounds when he fell from a truck at the market in 1972. She had loved him when all he had was dust and debt. And now, in this grand mansion he built for her, it was only a gardener's niece who remembered what tenderness felt like. Over the next few days, Eliza's quiet gestures continued. A new flower every morning beside his bed. Cooling wipes on his forehead when the afternoon heat swelled. Even small things, making sure the water beside him was fresh. She never asked for praise. Never lingered. And yet, she was the only person who looked into his eyes with something resembling care. The contrast became unbearable. While his children sat in the study plotting how to divide shares, Eliza sat in the garden reading old books with her uncle. While they called their accountants in Accra to explore asset access, Eliza helped the cook gather okra and plantain for soup. And Edmund, pretending to drift in and out of sleep, began to observe more than he ever had. One afternoon, while Victor stormed out after a failed attempt to ask for a power of attorney signature, Eliza entered the room with a folded piece of cloth. "I mended your old scarf," she said, assuming he was dozing. The thread was coming loose. She laid it gently beside his pillow. But this time, Edmund opened his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. She froze. "Oh, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," he said. "Your kindness did." She offered a small, surprised smile. "It's nothing, sir. Just trying to help where I can. No one else seems to try." Her eyes softened, but she said nothing. That evening, Edmund sat up fully for the first time in a week. He drank his cocoa without help. And when Mr. Quabler arrived the next day, he made a decision that would change everything. "Rewrite the will," he said. "Leave the mansion and the cocoa empire to someone who still knows what love feels like." 3 days after he had truly looked into Eliza's eyes and seen something human again, Edmund Langley sat upright in the small library tucked behind his bedroom, a room no one entered anymore. Dust still clung to the shelves, but the air was heavy with the scent of aged paper and old decisions. Across from him sat Mr. Quabler, his leather briefcase open and the new draft of the will resting atop a stack of official seals. He read through it slowly, his voice low and measured, the only sound apart from the ticking grandfather clock in the corner. Clause 1. The cocoa farms, including storage warehouses, processing facility, and vehicles registered under Langley Holdings Limited, to be inherited in entirety by Miss Eliza Mensah, age 28. Edmund gave a slight nod. Clause 2. The mansion and all property within its walls to also pass to Miss Eliza Mensah, with full rights to alter, lease, or resell at her discretion. Another nod. Mr. Quabler paused. And you're certain, sir? You've left out all 4 of your children completely. I gave them everything already, Edmund replied, his voice tired but resolute. Education, luxury, opportunity. And when I needed them, they gave me their backs. You realize this decision will cause an earthquake in your family. I hope it does. Earthquakes reveal who built on rock and who built on sand. 4 days, Edmund kept the revised will hidden in the library safe, secured by a code only he and Mr. Quabler knew. Meanwhile, the children continued their charade of concern. Naomi was the first to grow impatient. She paced the hallways in her silk kaftan, designer sunglasses still perched on her head despite the fact she was indoors. Why is he not getting worse? She hissed to Leo over a plate of untouched croissants. The doctor said he could deteriorate at any time. Leo shrugged. If he doesn't name us in his will soon, we may have a problem. Victor, ever the schemer, tried to probe Mr. Quabler with subtle questions during a late lunch. So, Uncle Quab, he said with a smirk, Dad mentioned updating some documents. You wouldn't happen to know if we're all still beneficiaries, would you? Mr. Quabler sipped his palm wine slowly. That, Victor, is a matter between a man and his soul. Benjamin took a different route. He tried to sweet-talk his father. He began bringing up childhood memories, speaking in a softer tone, offering to bring Edmund home to London for treatment. But Edmund saw through it all. Their words had no weight. Their eyes betrayed their hunger. Only Eliza remained unchanged. She continued bringing fresh flowers. Continued helping her uncle. Continued smiling quietly at the house staff and listening when they spoke. And every now and then, when she thought no one was looking, she paused by the ancestral shrine in the courtyard and poured water for the spirits, a ritual she believed in, though she never spoke of it. Then came the night it all cracked open. Victor, who had long suspected something was going on behind closed doors, rose in the dead of night and crept toward the library. He had bribed one of the house staff for the knowledge that the lawyer had spent hours there with their father. The door was locked. But the safe? He recognized it from his teenage years. And the code? Well, Edmund had always been sentimental. Victor punched in 1968, the year Edmund married Margaret, and the safe clicked open. Inside, his eyes caught the crisp new will. He read only the first 3 paragraphs before the blood drained from his face. Eliza Mensah. Everything. No conditions. No partial shares. No clauses for should she decline. Just Eliza. He didn't take the will. He didn't need to. He simply took a photo on his phone and rushed to find Naomi and Leo. 10 minutes later, the Langley children were wide awake and in a rage. She's a witch, Naomi hissed. I said it from the start. You think this poor girl just happens to appear while he's dying? And now he's handing her the whole estate. Leo was pacing. He's gone mad. This is manipulation. Exploitation. We need to act now. By morning, the storm had begun. First came the whispers. Naomi planted stories with the staff. Did you hear she comes from a line of village priestesses? Someone said her mother used to sell love potions at the market. That's how she got into the old man's heart. Leo took it further. He paid a group of local youth to spread rumors in the village. That girl in the mansion? She's bewitching Chief Langley. He's not sick, he's cursed. And Victor, the boldest of them all, approached Eliza directly. It was just after sundown. She was walking home after tending to her uncle when he appeared, blocking her path. You don't know what you're playing with, he said quietly. I haven't done anything wrong, Eliza replied, calm but firm. Victor stepped closer. You've done everything wrong. But it's not too late to leave. I'll give you money. A lot of it. Just disappear. If you don't, he smiled coldly. Things will get very, very messy for you. Eliza looked him in the eye. If your father saw you now, I wonder what he'd think. He doesn't have to see, Victor said. He'll be dead soon anyway. Unbeknownst to them, Edmund stood upstairs, hidden behind the curtain of his bedroom window, watching everything unfold below. He heard the words. He saw the threats. He saw Eliza stand tall, unshaken. His heart, once heavy with sorrow, now burned with something stronger. Resolve. That night, he called Mr. Quabler. It's time, he said. Let them have their theater. When the curtain falls, we'll see who's left standing. The mansion was quiet the next morning. But it was not the peaceful kind of quiet, it was the tense, brittle silence that settles before something breaks. The staff tiptoed through hallways. No one laughed. No one sang. Whispers floated like ghosts through the corridors. Did you hear what happened to Eliza? They say the children threatened her. Is it true, the chief is not dying? Upstairs, Edmund Langley sat in his robe, gazing out at the mist-covered cocoa fields, his face unreadable. In his lap rested a velvet box, inside it, a traditional gold-stamped seal, passed down from his grandfather. It had only been used 3 times in the last 30 years, for land contracts, his wife's memorial trust, and now, to sign the final will. Today was the day. But before he revealed the truth, he wanted his children to feel what he had felt: isolation, betrayal, silence. So he told his nurse to let the rumor spread. The chief has collapsed again. Within an hour, the mansion's living room was filled with murmurs. Elders from the village began arriving in solemn procession, dressed in black and burgundy Kent. Some were relatives, others just respected community members. Drummers sat quietly outside, ready to play the sacred rhythms when the news became official. The ancestral stool was polished and placed near the foyer. Everyone was preparing for Edmund Langley's passing. And his children? They arrived last, not with grief, but with urgency. Naomi wore a silk headscarf and large sunglasses, her phone clutched tightly in one hand. Leo wore a tailored black agbada he had bought 2 days before just in case. Victor came chewing gum, nodding to the elders with a practiced air of piety. Benjamin wore a gray suit and carried a copy of the temporary power of attorney document he had drafted, just in case they needed to secure assets before the will was read. They walked into their father's room, preparing to mourn publicly. But the bed was empty. The nurse stood by, calm and still. And then, a voice came from behind them. So, you came after all. Not to say goodbye, but to claim what you never earned. They turned. And there he stood, Edmund Langley, alive, dressed in a full ceremonial cloth of red and gold, supported by a carved walking stick. He looked not like a dying man, but a king risen from exile. The silence shattered into gasps. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. Leo stepped back. Victor muttered a curse under his breath. Benjamin froze, blinking rapidly as if trying to reset a faulty image. You lied to us? Benjamin managed. No, Edmund said coldly. I exposed you. His voice, though slower with age, was steady and sharp. I wanted to know if I mattered to you as a man, or only as a wallet. And now I know. He looked to the crowd that had begun gathering, village chiefs, cocoa workers, old friends. All of you, my people, know the journey I've walked. From barefoot on this land to blessing hundreds with work and hope. I built this not just for my children, but for the soul of this village. He gestured for Mr. Quabler to step forward. The lawyer held up a sealed envelope. Today, Edmund continued, the new will shall be read. In full view of the ancestors and the living. Naomi stepped forward, panic now bleeding into her voice. Daddy, please, this is madness. No, he said, silencing her with a look. Madness is thinking I wouldn't notice your betrayal. Threatening Eliza. Spreading lies in my name. You shamed your mother's memory with your greed. Then he turned to the crowd and raised his voice. I leave everything, the mansion, the farms, the shares, and the land, to Miss Eliza Mensah, daughter of Kwaku Mensah, granddaughter of this very soil. Not because she is blood, but because she showed me what blood forgot, love, care, and honor. The crowd erupted, some in gasps, others in applause. A few villagers cried. And in the midst of the chaos, Eliza, who had been quietly watching from the garden's edge, stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't understand," she said, barely above a whisper. "You don't need to," Edmund said gently. "You've already passed the only test that matters." The fallout was instant. Naomi stormed out in tears, shouting that she would sue. Leo cursed and demanded proof. Victor threatened to go to the media. Benjamin stood frozen, clutching his unsigned legal document, his face pale with disbelief. But none of it mattered now. The elders began a slow, rhythmic chant of acceptance. Drums began to sound outside. The staff lined up in honor. The ancestral stool was carried back into the courtyard, not for mourning, but for a celebration of renewal. The house of Langley had not fallen. It had been reborn. A week had passed since the day Elder Hill shook with the truth, when the mighty Edmund Langley, cocoa magnate and village icon, stood up from his supposed deathbed and revealed the storm that had been brewing behind his silence. The news spread like wildfire. The gardener's niece has inherited the empire. Eliza Mensah, the new queen of Elder Hill. The Langley children disowned. Newspapers from Accra to Kumasi picked up the story. Bloggers in London ran dramatic headlines. Talk radio hosts debated whether Edmund had lost his mind, or found it. But Eliza wanted none of the fame. On the morning after the announcement, she did not move into the mansion. Instead, she walked back to the modest brick bungalow she shared with her uncle Kwaku, just past the mango grove at the far end of the estate. She still fetched water from the clay jar near the back door. Still rose before dawn to pray. Still stopped to greet every villager she passed with a smile. And that, more than anything, is what began to change people's hearts. Where most expected her to flaunt her new title, Eliza remained. Eliza. Edmund watched from the high veranda, sitting beneath the carved awning with a cup of steaming millet porridge. Each morning, he observed as Eliza walked through the cocoa fields barefoot, speaking with the workers, asking about their families, learning how things actually worked, not from reports, but from mouths and hands stained with honest labor. One morning, she approached him with a simple request. "May I turn the guest house into a learning center for the children of the workers?" she asked. "Many of them don't go to school regularly. And I used to be a teacher." Edmund smiled. "Do whatever your heart says," he replied. "That's why it's yours." And so she began. Within a month, the guest house was repainted and repurposed. Bookshelves replaced furniture. Old mattresses became reading corners. Retired teachers from the village were hired to tutor part-time. And on the day of its launch, over 40 children arrived, wide-eyed and barefoot, clutching slates and pencils. The estate that once housed whispers of greed now echoed with the laughter of children reciting proverbs. As for the Langley children, they scattered like dry leaves. Naomi flew back to Dubai and fell into scandal when her credit accounts were frozen. Leo's startup collapsed within weeks. Victor attempted to sell old family land but discovered the deeds had long since been transferred out of reach. Benjamin tried suing Eliza, but even the judge in Accra dismissed the case as a clear failure of character rather than inheritance. None of them returned to Elder Hill. But strangely enough, Edmund did not curse them. "I gave them everything but time," he once told Eliza, as they sat beneath the neem tree together. "Maybe they became hollow because I was too busy building empires and not enough building men." Eliza looked at him thoughtfully. "Even a tree that bore bitter fruit can still cast shade," she said gently. "Your story isn't finished yet." He laughed, for the first time in a long time. In his twilight years, Edmund moved into a smaller cottage at the far edge of the farm, a quiet retreat he built decades ago but never used. He asked Eliza to run the estate fully and gave her his old ledgers and journals, each one scribbled with lessons learned and mistakes made. She read them at night, often aloud to Kwaku, and used them to restructure the company with a new vision: fair wages, women-led cooperatives, a health fund for injured workers, and free school meals for every child on the estate. Under Eliza's leadership, Langley Holdings transformed from a cocoa giant into a living legacy, one rooted in kindness, integrity, and community. The villagers would often point to her when visitors came and whisper, "That's her." The heir no one expected. But she never walked with pride. Only purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the cocoa trees, Eliza stood beside Edmund's chair, holding his hand. His grip was weaker now, his once sharp eyes more clouded. "You made the right choice," she whispered. He gave a slow nod. "No," he said softly. "I corrected the wrong one." Then he looked up at her, a faint smile on his lips. When the world looks back on the Langley name, they'll remember you. And with that, the story closed as all good stories do, not with a crown, not with riches, but with the humble breath of a man who finally learned what it meant to love, and the quiet rise of a woman who never needed to conquer to lead. And so, the estate did not pass to blood, but to worth. Not to the loudest voices, but to the quietest heart. The legend of Elder Hill lived on, not through the name of Langley, but through the soul of Eliza,